your hamstring muscles are the ones at the back of your thigh, and they have tendons at the bottom that attaches them around the knee, and tendons at the top that kind of comes together and attaches right into the sit bone where you take most of your pressure when you're sitting. Now, you can get hamstring tendinopathy in the lower tendons as well, but that's called distal hamstring tendinopathy, and it's a totally different condition. If you want a video about that, have a look at the description of this one. I'll put a link to that there. So with proximal or high hamstring tendinopathy, it's the upper tendons that's affected. Now, what's also significant is to understand that your hamstring tendons work whenever you pull your leg back, so they help with hip extension, but they also help to flex your knee. But also in conditions like when you run, for instance, and your leg goes out in front of you, they work quite hard to slow the leg down. So any movement where you're walking, especially if you're going up hills or upstairs, or if you're running, if you're jumping, that all works the hamstring tendons. So why would you develop an injury like a tendinopathy in those upper tendons? Well, it's all about the normal cycle of tissue breakdown that we get with different activities. So whenever you work the body, and by work I mean either exercise it or just use it during the day for any task that loads it, you get little micro injuries in the parts of the body that you're using. And this is absolutely normal, and it's needed for the body to grow stronger, because that area that has the micro injuries then signals to the brain that, hey, this tissue needs to be made stronger. So in the period after you've done the activity, the brain then strengthens the tissue, but not just to the previous level, it actually makes it stronger than before. So if you allow this repair cycle to happen continuously every time that you've exercised or used that area, you grow stronger over time. Now, where things go wrong is if you don't allow that recovery time to take place. Because then what happens is, instead of the body gradually growing stronger, you're now exercising or doing the activity again before all the micro injuries have repaired. And then instead of growing stronger, you get that it actually weakens it and you get a proper injury in the end. Now, with high hamstring tendinopathy, there's two factors at play. It's not just using the muscles and working them. That, of course, can overwork them, but there's also the compression element. Because of how the hamstring tendons attaches to the sit bone, they can be pressed really hard against the sit bone, and that can overwork it in itself. Now, normal circumstances, the hamstring tendons are designed to take that pressure, and it's usually not an issue. It's again just if you overdo it. So if we think of the compression in that area when you're sitting directly on it, that puts pressure on it. But if you bend forwards, the more you bend forwards, the tighter those hamstring tendons are pulled over the sit bone, and the more compression you get. And often it's that combination of being bent over and working it really hard in that position that you then get, you're using the muscles, but also when it's maximally compressed, and that then predisposes you to this injury if you're not careful. So the three most common ways that we see people getting injured is, the obvious one is for people who do sport or physical activity, if they ramp it up too quickly or they don't give themselves enough recovery time. So we're thinking of runners doing a lot of high intensity running, fast running, uphill running. We think of cyclists because they're in that bent over position plus cycling really hard, which can really cause that. But also regular things like gardening. If you're not used to that activity and all of a sudden you're doing a lot of bending over and carrying heavy things, that counts as overtraining because you're ramping up your activity too quickly for the hamstrings to grow stronger and adapt. Another common one is overstretching. Now, bizarrely, a lot of people prescribe hamstring stretches for people with high hamstring tendinopathy. If you've been given those, please have a look. I've made a video about why stretching is really not the best exercise for this condition or treatment, and actually just makes it worse, because the problem with stretching is that you then really, when you bend the leg, when you bend your body forwards, when your leg is straight, you're wrapping that hamstring tendon right over the sit bone and pulling it tight. Again, this is not a problem if you're doing it in moderation, but if you're sitting in that position for a very long time and really pushing it, that can actually cause it to become injured if you do it too often. And if you're injured and you do that as an exercise, that can just, it's like pressing on a bruise, it irritates it further. but more on that in my treatment videos. If you want to see links to those videos, have a look at the description of this one. And then lastly, there's sitting. And this is a very common reason we see in people who don't do sports for getting high hamstring tendinopathy. It's typically, and there was a real spike in COVID, I found, because people were working from home. So what happened was they were sitting on really hard chairs that wasn't really meant for them to sit on for that long. And that direct pressure on the sit bone irritating the hamstring tendons. They weren't taking enough breaks, so cutting off the circulation, not allowing it to recover. And then the hamstring tendon just goes, I'm overworked now. So sitting for very long periods of time can be a really big aggravating factor or cause for high hamstring tendinopathy. I've made a whole video about how you can use sitting as part of your rehab, because even if it wasn't the cause of your hamstring tendinopathy, it's often one of the things people find most uncomfortable. So have a look at the description of this video if you want a link to that one. I go through the whole process of why it's not a good idea to just avoid sitting and what you can do instead. There are also other factors that can predispose you to tendon injuries like high hamstring tendinopathy, because they affect the health of the tendon and make it easier to injure them. The first is genetics. Now, I know you can't do anything about your genetics, but if you understand it better, you can do other things to mitigate against it. So a common genetic variation that can predispose to tendon injuries is hypermobility syndrome, where the connective tissues, including the tendons, is just not as strong as in people who doesn't have it. If you're in any stage of the menopause, so perimenopause or full-blown menopause, the problem with that is that your estrogen levels drop when you enter the menopause. And estrogen is really important for collagen production. Now, tendons are mainly made up of collagen fibers. So when you're in the menopause, estrogen levels are low. It means that you just can't produce new collagen fibers as quickly and can't strengthen them as quickly. So if you now do exercise or activities that uses the tendon, you can't repair them that quickly. So it's always important to, if you notice that you're entering the menopause, you start just taking note of your body and don't try to stubbornly push through it, but rather understand how it's affecting you and just factor in more recovery time for yourself. Then thirdly, there's also some medications, and the most prominent of the medications that can affect tendons are fluoroquinolone antibiotics. Now, depending on the country you're in the UK, especially, they are quite good at it that they don't prescribe it that often at all. If they do prescribe it, it's only in cases where nothing else works. And that is because these antibiotics has been shown to be so detrimental to tendon health. Other countries, unfortunately, doesn't have such strict rules. And we see a lot of patients who end up with tendon injuries related to fluoroquinolone antibiotics. Now, we've made videos about them in the past. If you want to understand more about those type of injuries, have a look at the description of this one. And then finally, there's also your general health. Things like diabetes, thyroid problems, as well as really high cholesterol has been shown to influence tendon health and make them more vulnerable to injuries. So there's a real case to be made that if you're struggling with tendon injuries, do check that you look after your whole system, that you eat well, you exercise enough, which I know is a little bit hard if you've got pain, but there's always something you can do. And as part of what we try to do for our patients is figure out other ways that they can stay fit and healthy while they're recovering.